In a lot of ways, one might look at Jedi Master Sifo-Dyas as a sort of fool, an easily manipulated pawn in the grand plan of the Sith. In commissioning the clone army upon Kamino, Sifo-Dyas did the bidding of the Sith, ultimately providing the Republic and Jedi with an army that would eventually turn galactic sentiments against both and allow for an era of empire ruled by the Sith to emerge. Not only did the Jedi Master commission the army to the benefit of the Sith, but he did so without telling anyone else within the galaxy, creating a situation where he would be easily removed and the clone army would then be commandeered by the Sith. However, when we look deeper into the story and situation of Sifo-Dyas, one begins to understand that he wasn't quite the patsy and fool that he seems to be. He really is more of a tragic character within the events leading up to the Clone Wars. As we'll see, in many ways, the Jedi Master acted perfectly reasonable within the situation, wherein outside realities that were out of his control were ultimately what allowed him to fall into the trap laid by the Sith. This is particularly true related to the reasoning behind the seemingly bizarre and foolish decision to tell no one else about the clone army on Kamino. In this video expose, I will explain why Sifo-Dyas was forced to keep the clone army a secret from everyone within the galaxy. First, it must be understood that Sifo-Dyas' motivation for commissioning the clone army wasn't simply a situation of being better safe than sorry, wherein the army might be a good idea to have in the future. Rather, the creation and existence of the army was seen as being of paramount importance, wherein the army was an absolute necessity to face the threats that were on the horizon. Gifted with the power of foresight and precognition, Sifo-Dyas started to see a coming darkness that would be unleashed upon the galaxy a full 30 years before the Clone Wars began. During a meeting on the planet of Sereno 3 decades before the war, also attended by Jedi Masters Qui-Gon Jinn, Dooku, and Jocasta Nu, Sifo-Dyas struck up a conversation with the Dark Lord of the Sith Darth Plagueis, who was also attending as his alter ego, Higo Damask. During the conversation, Sifo-Dyas was clearly concerned with the direction of galactic politics, not outright dismissing Plagueis' position of a possibility for discontent and conflict breaking out within the galaxy, and even a rising threat of secession from Republic member worlds. As Plagueis inquired about what the Jedi Order would do if conflict did ignite within the galaxy, although visibly shaken by the mere thought of it, but similarly just as concerned about the likelihood of such an event, Sifo-Dyas was forced to conclude that the Republic would never reverse its stance regarding its roughly 1,000-year commitment to demilitarization that was ushered in through the Ruusan Reformation. Agreeing with his good friend Jedi Master Dooku, the Republic would only militarize if there was a perceived threat that made it absolutely necessary. These early concerns regarding the likelihood of conflict would ultimately blossom into full conviction that war was inevitable. In another crucial conversation with Darth Plagueis 20 years later, only 10 years before the Clone Wars, the Jedi Master was clearly convinced that the galaxy was on a dark path. As he told Plagueis, again of course appearing as his public persona Damask, Sifo-Dyas saw that war was imminent. Further, he confessed that Master Yoda and the High Council were unconcerned with his warnings, finding that they were preoccupied with other matters that Sifo-Dyas saw as far lesser in importance. Sensing Sifo-Dyas' fear, this was when Plagueis introduced the idea to the Jedi Master about using the cloners of Kamino to create an army, an idea that he would ultimately put into action. It's through these 2 important conversations with Darth Plagueis where we see exactly why Sifo-Dyas was forced to tell no one about the existence of the clone army upon Kamino. First, it was clear that he couldn't tell the Jedi High Council given that they'd already dismissed his concerns about the coming conflict. Although Sifo-Dyas doesn't disclose any hostility from the Council for his position, it's clear that there was, as he was eventually removed from the High Council for his beliefs. This would diminish any trust he'd have in disclosing his actions to the Council members. But of far greater importance was his knowledge about the Republic's dedication to the principle of demilitarization, and just how ingrained the doctrine was within the galactic government. If Sifo-Dyas let anyone else know about the clone army, he ran the risk of breaching two important pieces of legislation that had been in place for a millennium: the Rusan Reformation legislation and the Reformation Act, both instituting the process whereby the Galactic Republic demilitarized, reducing the size of its army, navy, and starfighter corps. Of course, the Republic would most likely act similarly even in other eras upon the discovery of a secret army, but in the era of Sifo-Dyas, we know for certain what the Republic's reaction would be if the clone army was discovered. Recognizing Dooku's accuracy in his statement 20 years earlier that the Republic would militarize only under a perceived threat, Sifo-Dyas knew that if his actions on Kamino were discovered, the legislation in place would force the Republic to dismantle the clone army before any threat revealed itself to the galaxy. Given that Sifo-Dyas knew that war was imminent, seeing visions of the coming darkness for decades, and that the Jedi were simply going to follow the course set by the Republic in dedicating themselves to a doctrine of demilitarization, it was far safer for him to keep the existence of the clone army to himself, as telling anyone else would jeopardize it. It wasn't a matter of if the army was needed for the Jedi Master, but when. And knowing that the Republic would decommission the army if it was discovered, Sifo-Dyas had to ensure that it survived until the conflict was ignited, as only then would the Republic adopt it. To ensure that happened, although it looks foolish in hindsight, given that it played into the hands of the Sith perfectly, the safest route for him to take was to keep the clone army known only to himself, hidden from everyone else in the galaxy, to prevent the Republic from disbanding it before it could be relied upon in the coming conflict. So there we have it, the legislation that forced Sifo-Dyas to keep the clone army a secret. We love making these videos, so why not subscribe for more fun Star Wars theories and discussions? Also, if you enjoyed the video, think about giving a like or leaving a comment. Or perhaps follow us on Twitter @SWReadingClub for updates regarding the channel. Or support the channel through Patreon for access to exclusive hangouts and book discussions. If not for me, for accepting bad advice from Sith Lords.